for people to start joining us, and we should start this webinar very soon. So welcome and thank you for joining us here today. So I think we're already streaming live on YouTube, so we can start. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world joining us here today. Welcome to this webinar and thank you for being with us. My name is Isabella Araújo and I'm a member of the Demand Reduction Unit team at the Inter-American Drug Abuse Control Commission, CCAD, of the Organization of American States, the OAS. So as we, the OAS, CCAD, and Colombo Plan, continue with our series of webinars, especially tailored for the youth leaders in prevention from the Caribbean and also from other parts of the world, from Africa, from Asia. We're very happy to be with you all here today to address today's topic, which is youth leaders' experience during a crisis, staying safe and taking care of others. As part of our agenda today, we will welcome our very special guests who will present for you. Mr. Dwayne Gutzmer, CEO, Institute of Law and Economics, and former CARICOM Youth Ambassador, and also a youth trainer. And Mohammed Husni, Sri Lankan youth leader. So at the end of the presentations, we will have Q&A sessions. If you want, we actually encourage you to ask questions and share your thoughts with us. If you want to speak, please raise your hand using the Zoom tool for that, and we'll call you and grant you access to open your microphone and your camera. So before we start, I want to thank you again for joining us here. I truly hope that you enjoy and that you actively participate in this session. I also want to introduce Ms. Dichin Choden, Program Officer at the Colombo Plan. She will also be moderating the session. So Dichin, welcome. And now I would like to invite Dwayne Gutzmer to join us and start his presentation. Dwayne, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Isabella, and good morning, everyone joining on this webinar. It's certainly a pleasure to join and share with you this morning. I'm only given 15 minutes, so I'm going to try and see just how much I can put in this 15-minute presentation. Again, thanks for joining us, and we're certainly hoping that you and your family are keeping safe during this period of uncertainty. So we're looking at a topic: youth leaders experience during a crisis, staying safe and taking care of others. And we know for young people, taking care of others is like second nature. And then we worry about what's happening to ourselves afterwards. So let's run through and see exactly how young people have been assisting during this pandemic. So the presentation journey, we'll do a little bit of definition. We'll talk about some negative impact on youth, and then we'll wrap up with the opportunities that's coming out of the pandemic. Certainly don't have to define coronavirus. We hope we didn't have to encounter it any at all. And I know in some places, certainly here where I'm presenting from in Jamaica, the cases are again rising, and we're hoping to get that under wraps. But just in case you don't know what COVID is, this is the definition and some of the symptoms, because I think it's very important that we are fully cognizant and aware of some of the symptoms, so that if we recognize it in ourselves or even in those that we serve with, then we are able to take the right precautions. All of a sudden, everyone has become a Sheldon. You find people with their Lysol, people with their hand sanitizers, and so on. And then even emojis are wearing masks these days. And I thought I would start on that, just to show just how things have changed in the blink of an eye. So some of the negative impacts that we've realized that COVID has had on youth, and certainly by no means is this super extensive, we're realizing some of the main areas of disruption is in education and training. A lot of our youth leaders would have been also in school or university doing their own education, pursuing their own educational career. And this has been disrupted and moved into an online version for some. But again, that presents its own set of challenges. We're realizing that a number of young persons were also affected by the job cuts and the layoffs that would have affected the different countries and territories across the world, not just in the Caribbean. And there is uncertainty also for those who still have a job. There's uncertainty among the labor force. How long is this entity able to keep me? How long will the pandemic go on for? Will I still be employed in another month, 2 months, and so on? And then we're seeing for those young people who are in business, it was already tough for them. And then the pandemic certainly made it a lot worse. And so we're seeing decline in their sales and decline in their revenues. And then when the curfews and restricted hours comes into play, that also affects the businesses in terms of their operating hours. Social and physical distancing also limit the number of employees that they can have at any one point. So that might also restrict the output that they would have normally had. There is also the increased demand on internet infrastructure, disrupting online activities. So maybe in the household, they were the only person who needed to use the internet, but now everybody in that household is relying on the internet and the computer that's there. So now it's a toss up and a juggle for the resources that's there. And then we're realizing also that nationally, there's a destabilization of the economy and certainly the growth targets, and who will inherit all of these loans that the countries will have to take for to get us out of this pandemic, the restructuring efforts and so on. It's the young persons who will inherit some of these decisions, some good, some bad, but again, the young persons are the ones who are going to be inheriting that and will have to plan for how the countries repay those debts as it accumulates. We're seeing the unemployment numbers, certainly not news to any of us, maybe just a degree. And then when we look at the Caribbean region, we're seeing that there's an estimated reduction in employment of generally around 22, 23% on average for the different countries. We're seeing Barbados, the estimate for Barbados is certainly among the highest, and then St. Kitts and Nevis following closely behind. Young people have been disproportionately affected throughout this particular period, largely because they are overrepresented in the heaviest hit industries, the hospitality, the retail, the arts, and certainly we realize that they are most times the first to go. When we look at the formal job losses and as an effect due to COVID, again, we can just see based on the slide that's here, the expected degree of impact that the countries are likely to have. And again, we'll share the slide with those on the webinar here so that you'll be able to go in more details, but we are realizing that the job losses certainly in the formal sectors are likely to be very dire. A lot of young people, as was mentioned, are in the social sectors, and so you realize that things like tourism and tourism-related enterprises have suffered. I know here in Jamaica for a whole period, could be about upwards of close to 2 months, the hotels were closed. And if the hotels are closed, it means the attractions linked to the hotels would have been closed also. It means the transportation persons who would have normally moved persons from one place to another certainly would have been affected as well. So there's a whole ripple effect based on the impacts of tourism. The entertainment industry is certainly one of them that young people are definitely represented in. Whether it is from an entertainment standpoint, they are the entertainers, or they are the persons who are working in these entertainment hubs. They have certainly been affected based on the different lockdown. I know, for instance, here in Jamaica, we are going through another round of entertainment clampdown just because of the potential for transmission at these different events. So what's this done to our young people? Lot of mental trauma and just mental stuff that they have to work through. We're seeing in different spaces, and we're getting calls from different groupings about persons having different issues of anxiety and loneliness and just fear of what is to come. And that coupled with already mental stuff that they were going through, it just a recipe for disaster. So I think one of the things that young persons themselves going through this one still have to try and reach out to others in their network to try and reassure them, to try and give them alternatives and suggest alternatives to them, and just offer a helping hand. So we're realizing that while they are working through their own degree of these issues, they certainly have to be putting on a strong face and working with others who themselves are going through some of this. So we're realizing, again, just the extent of the problems across the region. The different newspapers would have made different postings. Money woes hitting based out because of COVID. Now you have to shift money from some other area to fight COVID. So the drainage is a problem. The dengue fever that we were fighting before is now suffering because we transfer money. And then we're realizing that some of our young people were stuck in other places and needed assistance to come home. And certainly that's true right through the Caribbean. Young persons study all over. And so trying to get them home, or trying to get them in a safe and comfortable mind frame where they are, was also something that countries had to take into consideration. The shutting of the border is certainly something that all of us had to deal with. And while the shutting of the border helps and curtails the spread of the virus, what it does is certainly weakens the economies that rely on tourism and the tourism-related industry as a part of their national budget. The food risk is another thing that many countries had to grapple with, and certainly that would affect our young persons. The capacity of a young person to go and buy food supplies for weeks and months is certainly not always there. And so that food risk and food crisis would definitely have affected the young persons. I want to pause just to show a quick video to put into perspective the degree of what has been happening during this pandemic. So the question is, will we rise stronger? And I think there are evidence that certainly we are beginning to rise stronger, and the young persons in the different territories are at the forefront of this, there's push to rise stronger. So I'll just spend the last couple of minutes just to talk about the opportunities outside of this pandemic. And we realize historically, pandemics have shaped our society. We look at certainly something that came out of one of them, the dog sled race. This was birthed through a pandemic where they were trying to see how they can get um, medicine to homes in Alaska during, their pandemic, and what they were able to use to move through these different communities because of the snow was dog sleds. And then after that, they realized that, hey, this could become something. So there was some amount of a positive out of that. The bubonic plane inspired the universal law of gravity. And so because of this again, and we are certainly realizing that because there's a pandemic, what happened is that persons went home, persons left campus and so on. And so Isaac Newton returned home. And while he was there, he had this famous law of universal gravitation where the apple fell from a tree, sort of thing. And again, it was out of that bubonic plane period that happened. The Spanish flu gave rise to jobs for women and show that they also can do things just as equal to their male counterpart. So the Spanish flu caused a worker shortage, and so women had to step in and do some of the work that was traditionally held by men. And that changed the landscape and the game moving forward. And so we're realizing that some of these pandemics, they definitely cause change and cause us to rise stronger. So our youth are certainly rising stronger. They continue to look for opportunities and entry points for improvement. And we're seeing it right across the region. The food delivery boom, we're seeing young persons, getting bikes and doing deliveries and creating apps that can help with some of those movement and so on. In Trinidad and Tobago, there's a e-commerce explosion, pretty much just like many of the territories across the region. And then we're realizing that masks are the order of the day, and young persons are certainly getting in on that action as well. We're seeing here where a young librarian from Dominica helped parents as it relates to how to better cope and deal with their children who are now having to study from home, be a part of online programs at home. And so she saw that there was a need to assist the parents in dealing with that new normal. And then we've had a plethora of online webinars led by young people to try and again keep the spirits high. As youth rise stronger, we're realizing that COVID has unveiled widely what young people have always known about themselves. They are resilient and resourceful, irrespective of the odds that they meet up again. They're always trying to see what next, how else can I do this? Young persons have historically demonstrated that they are willing to take positions of leadership and offer insightful and meaningful contribution into complex policy problems. And then the last point here is that certainly young persons are fully au fait with the technology and can use the technology coupled with their skills and capacity to expose and cause a number of change, and also assist with some of the transformation that is taking place. So you find young people developing systems and knowledge processes. We find that they're relying on their resourcefulness and their perseverance to continue to organize online impromptu concerts and raise funds for other humanitarian needs, and also engage and encourage their counterparts. So lastly, I want to end by pointing to government and policymakers, things that government and policymakers should look at and consider strongly as we assist young people in Rising Stronger. We need to apply a more youth and generational lens in crisis response and recovery measures across public administrations. We need to update national youth strategies in collaboration with youth stakeholders, again, getting young people to be a part of that decision-making process, partnering with national statistic offices and research institutes to gather disaggregated evidence on the impact, certainly of COVID on age and certainly gender, as we try to track some of the inequalities that has been exposed based on the pandemic. We need to also look at leveraging young people's current mobilization efforts in mitigating the crisis through the different mechanisms that they know how to use. There are a number of social media platforms that come up and pop up all the time. How can we get young people to use those things to just be transformative and allow their peers to understand the severity of this pandemic? And lastly, providing targeted policies and services for the most vulnerable youth population. And we're realizing also that this is super important. The disabled community is one that is also terribly affected by this pandemic. People who face domestic violence, now you're locked at home, so there needs to be more resources and helplines to assist persons who are suffering from these things. So COVID will reshape our world. We don't know yet when the crisis will end, but what we are sure about is that by the time it does, our world will look very different. Let's enable our young people and unleash their creativity to help us to transform this new world that we are going in post-COVID. Thanks so much for listening.
Hello, Duane. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. That was a really good presentation. So before I move on, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Dishin Chodan. I'm a program officer with the Colombo Plant Drug Advisory Program, which is based in Sri Lanka. And then I usually look after the youth programs. And then we have a lot of youth with whom we have already interacted before. So thank you so much for that very informative presentation, Duane. I think when I first saw your presentation, when you sent it to me before, one thing that I really liked about it is how you put into perspective, like, the world pandemic, that everything that happened before, this is not the first pandemic. For some of us, it's the first time that's happening, but then the Spanish flu happened about 100 years ago, so very few people in the world. So we really don't know, but then what we can do is we can just revisit the history and then see how that pandemic had shaped our world. And so I think it's very informative for the young people, for them to understand and also to know that we can move forward from this. This is not going to end. That's very special about your presentation. So, and at the same time, I like the word that you used about enabling our youth, to overcome the current crisis that we have, and also how you stress focused on the aspect of taking care of oneself, and then using their skills and their talents to move forward from this.
And we're seeing manifestations of it right across the youth landscape. Even some of your own youth leaders throughout the Caribbean. I know, for instance, my namesake, whose name isn't spelled correctly, he led a group of young persons in terms of just training, physical training, and trying to get themselves in shape during the pandemic, because that was also something that was affecting us. We're home, we're locked up, we're eating all this food, we're gaining weight. So now you have all sorts of other complications. And then he was able to use his own talent, his own skills in terms of, the physical working out, and help others along that journey. So we're seeing different manifestations of it.
Yeah. As someone who's been a lifelong youth supporter and self-proclaimed youth advocate, I'm very happy to see how our young people are taking this chance. In some cases, they're snatching this opportunity to do good things.
Yeah.
So I will open up the floor to the audience. Just in case you have any questions, you can type out the questions in the chat that we have on screen, or you can also put it on the Q&A, and then we can address it at the end of the webinar after our second speaker speaks. If you have questions, you may also raise your hand using the Zoom platform. I think we will have questions as we go on. So in the meantime, if you are unable to ask the questions, you can put it in the chat and we'll address the question at the end of the webinar. So thank you, Duane, for a very Caribbean experience and also putting the pandemic in context. And moving on, we have Mohammed Husni. He is from Sri Lanka. He is one of the most active youth leaders that I know, who's done a lot of volunteer work, who has also done some amazing work globally, not only nationally. And I think what Husni is going to share is going to be quite inspirational for our audience here. Husni, before you move on, please do introduce yourself properly, because I don't think I was able to do you justice.
No problem. Thank you, Dishan. Thank you for inviting me. So thank you very much for Colombo Plan as well as the OSC CAT team for inviting me to join this webinar. As Dishan requested, let me give you a quick introduction to myself. I'm from Sri Lanka. I'm based in Sri Lanka. I've been here since my birth. I've been an active volunteer, passionate about the sustainability, climate change, and most of the environment and youth empowerment work. And also, I've been part of the Road Track movement, which is a youth-led movement in Sri Lanka, which is also a global organization, which is a youth program of the Rotary International, where I headed Sri Lanka and Maldives during the years 2016-17, where we have around 4,500 young volunteers who are professionals, entrepreneurs, as well as undergraduates from all across the country. I'm also very much happy to see most of the participants coming from different regions for today's session, seeing some of you from the Caribbean, as well as Asia and the Europe. Because I just remember that I was also very closely working with most of your regions, because in 2013, I was elected by the Commonwealth member countries as its founding vice chair, responsible for inclusion and engagement of the Commonwealth Youth Council, where I got a lot of opportunity to work with youth organizations in these regions. And also currently, apart from all my volunteer work, I also co-founded and I lead, rather co-lead a team of professionals called Impact Voices, where we work on a number of projects that promotes youth participation, sustainable development goals, as well as innovation in reimagining the civil society governance, as well as the economies in the country. So that's something that I do right now. And also, let me also give a quick introduction to my session today. So I think Duane did a fantastic job bringing out the history and the best practices that we have seen and how young people have been taking the lead during a crisis across the globe. And also he also highlighted how it can be seen as an opportunity for young people and the role of young people in addressing those challenges. My presentation also, as one of yours as a youth leader, what I thought was I'll talk more about like how we sort of worked as a team with our volunteers in Sri Lanka, as well as how we engage young professionals from diverse backgrounds, and also what we did in Sri Lanka as well as regionally during the crisis. But also I'm planning to bring certain points for you all to reflect so that you can see how we have done back in our countries, but also what sort of a learning that you all can take out of it, which can be reflected and localized in your own communities. So the topic today is youth leaders' experience during a crisis. It's also a very important part that I really loved about this webinar is that the tagline, it says, staying safe and taking care of others. So something that I realized being a youth leader as well as, advocate, working across a number of organizations in the region as well as in the country, this pandemic has been, as much as we call it as a challenge, and also it's an unprecedented time that it's something that we have never imagined in our lives. Everyone had their plans for 2020. Some of you wanted to get graduated, have that fancy photo in your memory lane. Some of you wanted to find new job opportunities. Everyone had their own dreams for 2020, but this is not something that we expected, but we all have gone through for almost last 6 months, right? So something looking back at last 6 months, what I can say is, as much as it's a challenge, we had to also understand we are not alone. It's something that entire world is going through right now. So as youth leaders, something that I have seen among my peers, my volunteers, as well as my friends, is that the positive thing about is young people have been taking this as an opportunity for them to grow, reflect, as well as see how we can sort of take the maximum out of it. So I understand some of the young people are very clueless, and they are sort of thinking like, okay, what I'm going to do afterwards? Everything is stuck. No one can come to our country. I can't go out of the country. Education institutes are closed. People are getting scared to move around. There are a number of challenges. But I think something that I can emphasize here, my dear friends, is that as much as it's a challenge, we have to acknowledge it's a challenge. And it's a tough time for all of us, so we cannot deny it. We all have to acknowledge it. But also the best part of it, it's also I see as a great opportunity for young people to unlock our potentials. Why I'm saying that is, as much as we are so much passionate about number of issues and bringing change in the world, and also we want to do a lot of good things in the world. Something, if you really look back our time 6 months before, most of us have been so busy with our own life and daily routines in our lives, right? We have been either studying, either we have been keep on volunteering, or keep on working on jobs, keeping ourselves so busy. So we have been also running around despite our age. I mean, you must be 18 years, 20 years, 25 years or 28 years, but then still we all have been running around the world as well as our busy with our daily routines, just like adults, because we had so much in our mind to achieve. We had so much on our plate, so that usually what happened was we always so what happened was we been so busy to even reflect on ourselves. So the best part I saw among my friends, as well as something personally happened to me, is it was a great opportunity for us to sort of take a break, look back, reflect, and also understand what's happening around the world. How can I adapt myself? How can I know myself better? And also how can I better prepare for the future that is there? Right. So I think number one point I want to bring here is about the young youth leaders and the experience of young people, is that as much as it's being a challenge, it has also been an opportunity. And I think still it's not too late. If you are listening to this webinar, and if you have not made use of this opportunity to reflect on what I've been doing, is it something that relevant that I'm doing? Or is it something that I can survive in the world with what I've been studying, with my work, or with my attitude, or the priorities that I have in my lives, is something that we all can think about. Even if you're a young person or adult, I think it's a great opportunity that we all have got with this crisis to take that pause and look back. Number two is also something that we have to understand. All young people, there are millions of young people out there, and not everyone has the same privilege and the opportunities. So this is also the bitter truth that we have to accept, because sometimes when we meet as peer leaders, youth groups from different continents. Sometimes we discuss, bring examples, thinking that, okay, we all can come on webinar and talk like this, but we had to also understand there are millions of young people are excluded from these digital conversation, and they are digitally excluded, right? So we have to also understand and keep that in our mind. So if you're someone who is worried that I don't have anything, that I'm going through a lot of challenges, but then you have to remember that if you're part of this conversation, or if you're coming on YouTube and watching this webinar, you are privileged than millions of people out there, because that's why you have the access to internet. That's why you also have access to this webinar, and then you got this information and you're listening to us, right? So that is also something I wanted to highlight for young leaders as a great opportunity that we have. And also it says a lot about our responsibility in helping others. So if you have, because sometimes we say like, okay, I don't have a job. I lost my job maybe because of the pandemic, or I couldn't continue my studies. I can't get graduated because of this pandemic. Or my parents are going through a difficult time, my family is having this much of challenges. But we also have to understand as young leaders, and this is something that I saw in Sri Lanka as well as with my networks, that people never started to complain, but they realized the opportunities they have. It can be the simple thing like having access to the internet, and they started to think innovatively, okay, I have some advantage here, so how can I help others? I'll bring you one example that I did personally in Sri Lanka. So let me share the screen with you. Right. So one of the things that we did in Sri Lanka, it was in mid-March that we had the lockdown started in Sri Lanka. Everyone is getting panicked, like, okay, it's because no one has experienced it before, because earlier it was said it was 1 week, then it started getting extended, and people start to worry about their daily routines, their work, education, and whatnot. And then what happened was, within 1 week time, with my friends, with my colleagues, what we did was we started to think what we can do immediately, because you had to understand during the first time of the lockdown, even you can't go out to help people out, right? All you had was you knew people that whom you can connect over the phone or on the internet, and you knew there are a few people out there who have the access to the internet, and we can probably engage with them. So even within 1 week from the lockdown, what we did was we organized this sort of initiative. It's called Leading Resilience. What we thought was people are getting worried, how we can help them. So we never waited for the funding. We never waited for any other opportunities. We never waited till someone come and offer and ask, like, can you help us? But collectively, we co-created with our own members, volunteers, and the passionate young leaders of this particular initiative that's called Leading Resilience. So what we thought was people are worried about, there are a number of issues. So we thought like maybe it's time that we talk about how we can create a dialogue and also keep people updated and create that conversation, how we can lead and become resilient in this pandemic, right? So what we did was, this is all designed by young people, from designing the flyer to execution to the moderation and everything. So that's why I thought like this should be one of the good examples. And interestingly, now we see number of webinars all over the world happening, but then it was when we were starting to think about it, it was in mid-March or rather third week of March, and we organize as soon as we can on this particular topic. That is also, we realize that time people are starting to think a lot, start worrying about it. So we created this Leading Resilience first webinar with a focus on social well-being, integration of mental health and psychosocial support into post-pandemic reconstruction and addressing inequalities in Sri Lanka. So if you look at, now this is, I'm talking about what we did in early April, that is within weeks from the lockdown. What we did was there, because I don't want to just share this example as just a project that we did, but I also want to bring the lesson out of it. So one of the things that we did here, when people are worrying about and confused what's going to happen next, we redirected them to prepare themselves for the post-pandemic world. So we were talking about, okay, fine, we all have to go through it. So why not we start talking about how we can lead each other, help each other, and also preparing for the post-pandemic world. And then we organize series of webinars like this. If you see the first webinar, we involved a professor from a psychological background. We involved the civil society. We involve people from the UN as well as even the private sector, because sometimes as young youth leaders, we tend to think about always the youth networks, youth groups, or maybe how we can help around the volunteer groups. But then something that we realize differently is when there's a pandemic, it's not only the volunteers who get affected. It's not only the activists who get affected. It's not only the people who are passionate about changing the world get affected, but also we realize millions of young people who are in the corporate sector getting affected. They are worried about their job security. They have lots of dreams to achieve. So we are also looking at the numbers. This is also something I want to bring it to you, all of you. It's important sometimes when we look at as young leaders and addressing challenges in the crisis, we have to also design our programs based on the evidence, based on the facts, based on the numbers, right? We cannot always be emotional as young leaders. And I have seen, it's a very good sign that I think this time in the pandemic have seen a number of young people are taking and designing programs based on the facts, based on the evidence, and based on the numbers. So we thought a lot of young people in the corporate sector are getting affected. And then there's so much of talk about the job security. So if you look at the first Leading Resilience on the screen, we organize a topic that is close to everyone, that is about the mental health, psychosocial support for people who are stuck at home, including the young people. And the second session that we organize on strategizing human resources for business continuity beyond the pandemic. And it's all, if you look at the latter layer from the opening remarks, session moderator, session analyst, is all done by young people, but we also engage seniors in the sector. Just like what Dwayne said, the intergenerational dialogue is something really important at the pandemic, because we cannot just stand alone. We need support from the people who have the experience, and we have to work together with them. So if you look at, we got the top companies in the country, and we start to create that discussion so that, young people also get some hope. They understand what sort of the world that awaits us, and how corporates are preparing to include them in that whole restructuring process with the human resource management. Right? So that is something that I want to bring as one of the examples that what we did as part of leading as young leaders during the crisis. But also it's important sometimes when we design programs, so a common factor that we all discuss is, okay, fine, we have psychosocial issues, people are stuck, so let's start helping them out and help each other, right? But also another point I would like to bring here is that how important it is for us as youth leaders to think out of the box during the pandemic, right? Because one of the important things for a young leader is, as I said before, we cannot, as much as we also human being, we have only lived for a couple of decades in this world. We also have probably learned a lot from the adults, and we definitely have to have that intergenerational dialogue and experience. But also it's important as youth leaders, we become informed leaders, right? We don't get stuck in this buzzing words, and then we sort of say, okay, we have to do all those things. We have to give them dry rations. That's what we could do, but we don't have money, so I can't do anything at home. So I'm just going to stay and spend my time and wait till they reopen the country. Is it going to be our strategy, or as young leaders, are we going to think out of the box? So this is totally depends on your country. But again, I'm trying to give an example how important it is as youth leaders. The moment we say youth leaders, I also want to bring that point. We have to understand why people recognize, sometimes we might not call ourselves youth leaders, but people might recognize you as youth leader, right? Why people see you as a youth leader or youth icon, or someone who can take the lead and support others, because at one point in your life, even though it's a very short time that we have spent in this world, that you have got certain opportunities that others have not got, right? For example, you might have gone through certain trainings, you might have gone through certain conferences, you might have gone through certain capacity building initiatives, right? So something that you might have to understand, it's a privilege that you have got even though you realized or not. And this is the best time that you can make use of those learnings, right? You might have heard number of inspirational talks, capacity building workshops. You might have gone to entrepreneurship. You might have attended sessions about the innovation. But I think this is the best time as young leaders that we can put all that in practice. One of the things in Sri Lanka, what we did was, I'll again bring one of the examples that we did in Sri Lanka so that, you can bring that as a sort of, insight to your own country, is that after a couple of months, there's a discussion about the elections going to happen in Sri Lanka. But even before the election, I think this is a global issue that we had, is that infodemic, right? Infodemic is about, there are lots of misinformation as well as the disinformation about the COVID-19. And people are getting panicked. It has created a number of issues in the countries, a lot of rumors, a lot of disinformation, and certain disinformations has also transformed people to become the promoters of hate speech in their own countries, right? You can probably, I don't want to bring certain specific examples here, but you can relate it. Certain countries started to blame certain other countries. But we had to understand, we all live in multi-ethnic countries. We live in like diverse communities. So what happened was certain communities started to target because of the COVID-19 situation, simply because of the disinformation and misinformation. So in Sri Lanka, what we did was, there are a number of young people took a stance that they need to stand against this. Why I am bringing this point again, if you have ever worried that I don't have funding, I don't have resources, no donor or no organization reached out to me to do projects, but still it's not an excuse for us as young leaders to not to do anything. So one of the things that we did, basically, luckily I was trained as a trainer on countering hate speech and disinformation online as well as offline incidents. So what we did was, I spoke to a few others and we had we reached out to certain donor, not technical partners more than the donors. And then we realized that it's an issue that in the country. So we started to do this. This is a brand new project that we came up in during the pandemic. What we realized was, usually we say keyboard heroes, right? So there's a norm in at least in this part of the world, in our countries, like we call keyboard heroes people who are not really doing anything in real life, but they're just always busy typing comments on Facebook, or just, talking about all the changes on the Facebook, but they don't take any effort to do anything in their real life. So I don't agree for this term for calling them keyboard heroes, but then it's something that people have been using this as a sort of negative term to identify people who don't do anything in real life, but just always, they are the warriors on the social media talking about all the things that they want to see in the world. But what we thought was, no, this is a great opportunity for us and we really need true keyboard heroes. So we basically started to design this program saying keyboard heroes, not all heroes wear capes, but some use keyboards. So this is all about, what we did was, we started to get some of the people who have gone through the training. We had a refresher training quickly. And then we rolled out in Sri Lanka, we have 3 languages. Basically, we use English as link language. We also have 2 national languages, that is Sinhalese as well as the Tamil. So we started to conduct workshops on countering disinformation and hate speech during the pandemic as well as during the elections, right? And trust me, this didn't cost us a single rupee, because what we did was we used all our resources that we have, and we started to sort of put this project together, right? So this is something that I want to share with you. So if you're someone who's worried, like I don't have resources, this is still, we can do a lot. And because one point I want to highlight, because this is something that you can also reflect in your countries. People think it's okay, people are just commenting, is that your ignorance, so disinformation or hate speech is an issue, but then, you know, sometimes people don't take it serious. But my dear friends, we have to understand as young leaders, because we talk about our future and the future that we want in 10 years time, 20 years time, 30 years time, as a collectively with our actions, we can overcome this pandemic. We can come out of this pandemic. But imagine the ripple effect made by the hate speech, the hatred, and the psychosocial issues it might create in the countries, in region, as well as all over the world. It will take decades for us to come out of that particular disaster. So it's as young people, so one message I want to leave it out, always look it out, think out of the box, because simple thing about, you know, addressing the hate speech and the disinformation, and why it is important, because sometimes we look around like, okay, we can't do anything right now. It's okay, but also we have to be informed leaders, and also think like what will happen after 5 years, after 10 years, and certain things that we create right now as a norm or the culture, how that will affect our future and our next generation, right? So that is something I want to leave as a food for thought for all of you to think. And also, since I've taken a lot of time, I'll just run through a couple of important points, and then I'll probably leave it out to the Q&A afterwards. Another important point that I want to highlight is that it's important that as young leaders, and also if you look at all the success stories that we have seen in Sri Lanka, as well as in my personal life, as well as in the regionally, is the power of partnerships. Now, again, a common problem that young people have is that, you know, how can we get resources? How can we sort of, you know, I'm so confused what I'm going to do. I have a little bit of idea. I don't know what to do. I see a lot of participants who have attended Colombo Plan programs since 2014. I see people who have attended, and some of you I have met personally in last October in the Caribbean islands through the IOS CCAT program. Something that we need to understand, there are a lot of resources around us. One of the best resources that you have is your own WhatsApp groups. The people that you have met in the conferences, you can always reach them out and also start talking about how you can co-create solutions. And this is also one message that I want to send it out to all of you, because in April, we had a fantastic get together with a number of organizations where we started to talk about like what we do in our countries and how people can help each other, right? And this is something, if you're someone from an organization who are advocating for youth networks, who have youth groups, maybe you can, if you're a project manager, you can take it up as sort of suggestion where you create and you build these discussions online. But even if you're an individual youth activist, youth leader, this is also, I think, untapped opportunity for all of us that we have not really sometimes reached out to our contacts. And there are so many people who would like to help you out, but then the question is like, are we really making use of them and seeking their support? So those are some of the points that I would like to share with you for young leaders, to how they can sort of, you know, relook at our strategies and reimagine the world that we want, and also how we can sort of, you know, lead the current situation. Because most important thing, all this time we have been saying like adults have left this world for us. We are just so confused and we all are advocating for change. But right now, even the adults are confused how to reshape or how to rebuild this world after the pandemic, right? So it's one of the greatest opportunity that we have ever got to co-create the world that we want with all the experienced elders, as well as we definitely as young people can take a lead in redefining the world that we want, because everyone wants to understand what awaits for us and also co-create that lovely, sustainable, inclusive, and the resilient world that we all want to see in the future. So that's the last message I want to leave with you all, and then probably we can have more discussion at the Q&A session. Thank you, and hand it over to Dichen.
Thank you, Husni, for a very personal account of your work in Sri Lanka. I know you have been very active in Sri Lanka, and also giving that, taking forward the point that Dwayne made about the intergenerational partnership. And I think what we are doing right now is a very good example of that. You know, we are collaborating together, and this is a partnership. And the other thing that I wanted to highlight on was was also the kind of work that you did. Like, you know, you gathered people around you, and also what you said about without any financial support, but you did all this thing without waiting for someone to come and help you do it. And this is something that I have I've always found really exciting in young people, is when they are able to take charge and then maybe approach the elders later on, you know, after they have planned out everything. I'm not saying that the young people should not seek out guidance from from older people, but it's amazing when young people do things like that. And also thank you very much for sharing your personal experience in Sri Lanka. I know you have done all the other work during the flood and even before that. So I'm sure the young people who are attending this webinar and who are watching on YouTube, they would have learned a lot from you, and also might have reassured them that, you know, for young people like you, there are a lot of things that you can do during a pandemic. Thank you both the speakers. I think we have one question. I think in some ways it was already answered, but just in case, if you want to highlight on it, Dwayne and Husni, the question is, even if the youth has an opportunity to better themselves from the current generation, I would like to know how the youth's decision can this have an effect on this world. I think it means how the youth's decision can have an effect on this world.
Yes, hi, Deechan. I think one of the things when I saw the question that came to mind is very often we try to eat the entire cow at one point, but I think if we start, or let's use chicken, if we, instead of eat the entire chicken one time, maybe we just start by eating the leg. And so if we take things in bite-sized pieces, and do our own small steps, then I think over time that will contribute to you know, just a more positive and long-term effect nationally and then globally. So let's think about trying to make the change in our own little community, on our own little space, and then over time see how we can build that up. I think what that does for young persons is reassure them that the capacity that they have is certainly one that is needed. It helps you to refine the ideas as you go from the community level to the parish level to the national level, internationally. So I would say start small, work through the ideas, and bring like-minded people along with you so that you don't feel the burden to make the change by yourself. You don't feel pressured to have to find a solution by yourself, but you're now creating a formidable and credible team that can assist in going forward. And something that Husna said, which is try and reach out and link with others who have some expertise that they might be willing to offer as well in terms of the going forward. I've been invited to talk at a number of webinars and discussion groupings like this, formal and informal. And most times I try to make myself available because I know that that's also something that young people can benefit from, where their own skills are being refined and realigned in order to try and make impacts nationally and of course, internationally.
Did you have a point to add there? And also, I think one of the things I realize is that true, one thing, like it's an opportunity for us to co-create the future, because everyone's like looking at like how we can come out of it. So it's an opportunity, but also it's important that we all become informed leaders, right? Because sometimes when you talk about the policy decisions, policy changes, it's also important that young leaders, we do our homework. We also know see the bigger picture, and while we are getting that journey, we can always work with the adults and also elders and sort of co-create it. But also it's also important that we become informed leaders, because one of the things that I really learned during the pandemic, one of the new topics that I really started to learn and start advocating and create dialogues is the inequalities. All this time I have been promoting sustainability, I've been talking about youth engagement and a number of other topics, but there's something I realized when I've been looking at same thing like with decision making, policy making and all. One of the common problem that we all have all over the world is this inequalities. So sometimes, despite the area that you work, it's also important that we have a sort of thought about addressing inequalities and create that, you know, discussion and make ourselves also well informed about it, right? So I also see it's a great thought that we should also engage. Yes, definitely we should be part of that co-creation of the future of the world, but also we have a responsibility during this time for us to also make ourselves informed youth leaders, so that, you know, we can contribute better with our experience during this pandemic.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I do think that the young people of this generation, like the current generation, I think they're more aware, you know, they're more conscious of what's going on in the world, right? But at the same time, I think when this generation goes on to better the world, I think they should not completely disregard what happened before that and all the achievements of other young people at different generations. You know, there's a wisdom that we take forward and work together. And that decision of working together, of co-creating and all that, I think that's going to be a really good partnership. Like, you know, just for example, Husni, when you called me during the, when you were doing this presentation, right? I think that was a very good discussion we had, you know, because we learned so many things from each other, right? It's not like, you know, we think that I'm going to learn more from older people than the younger people, right? But that doesn't always work, that formula. And I think we have begun to recognize that. And I think that's where most of the beautiful creation, I think, comes from, you know, young people and older people working together, respecting each other, and, you know, knowing that everyone has their own space. So that was it. So I think we don't have any other questions. I don't see any hand being, anyway. Yeah, so thank you so much, Dwayne and Husni, for joining us and for being very gracious for accepting our invitation for this webinar. I'll hand over to Isabella now.
Thank you so much, Dichin. Thank you, Dwayne. Thank you, Hosni. It was indeed a very interesting discussion that we had and very interesting presentations. I think we have a lot of things to think about, and I think you guys did a great job. So since we already passed 10 a.m., I just want to wrap up. But before we finish, I would like to invite Jimena Kalowski. She's my boss. She's the Demand Reduction Unit Unit Chief of OAS CCAT. She would like to say some words to you all before we finish. So Jimena, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Isabella. Okay, I want to share everyone who was shared their experience today. This is my cat. I also want to thank Colombo Plan for all their support. I want to thank you, Isabella, Dichin, Dwayne, Husni, and all our younger leaders. From the OEA-CCAT, we are very aware of what is happening in this pandemic, and we want to encourage our younger people to take the lead in this crisis to take care of themselves and their friends. Remember, the best way out of this crisis is to prepare yourself, and ask for help is a fundamental tool. When you see your friends decline, ask for help for them. That is the best gift a friend can give. I wish you all the best and good health. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jimena, and thank you everyone again for joining us from wherever you are, the Caribbean, from Africa, from Asia. We're very happy to have you all here, and we hope to see you all next time. This recording will be available, so we will email it to you in case you want to see it again or you want to share with your peers or other people. Thank you so much and see you next time.
Isabella, may I just, before we close,
Yes, yes.
I would like to pass the regards of our acting director, Dr. Nathalie Panaboke, who wasn't able to join us, but she wrote to me and she had asked me to say hi to everyone and to thank you all for joining the session today. So thank you so much and good night and good day to the rest of the world.
Yeah, my day just getting started.
Mine too.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
All right. Bye. Take care.
Stay safe. Bye.